Committee rooms.
Okay, we can't see them yet.
Are they out?
There we go.
How many people attending?
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Women and Equalities Committee, looking into shared parental leave. We are taking up where we left off before there were a number of votes last week. And I am pleased to welcome back Jonny Briggs, the Inclusion and Resource Director for Aviva. We've got Claire McCartney, Policy and Practice Manager from CIPD, and Nikki, Policy Officer, Women's and Equalities, Policy Officer at the TUC. Welcome back. Thank you very much for your patience. And we will pick up where we left off. Catherine.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's lovely to see you again. So when we left off last time, Claire was answering a question, I believe, and we were talking about what are the key barriers to promotion and take-up of SBL among parents working for smaller and private sector employers. And it would be great, I don't know if Claire is there.
I am, yes.
Oh, hi, Claire.
I think I had probably just finished what I was going to say.
So shall we pass
so I don't
on
know whether
to
anyone...
Nikki or Jonny? That's great, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks.
I didn't have really anything else to add. It's not an area that I have expertise, so I'm probably here more to talk about what we are what do at Aviva. So sorry. So I'll see if Nikki has anything she wants to add. I think you've pinned me. I don't know if that's intentional. So if everybody doesn't want to look at me, you could find a way to unpin. But I'm very happy whatever you want to, whatever way you want to work it. I'm just terrified for you having to look at me in a big screen when there are two other people you could look at.
Thank you. And if we can as well, just have the volume turned up a bit because it's quite difficult to hear. Yeah.
It's at max.
Is that's the max?
Yes. So Nikki, from the TUC, did you want to say anything?
I think I touched on it a little bit last week as well around obviously smaller employers, particularly in the private sector, they're less likely to be unionised. And I think I'd set out last week some of the advances that unions working with employers had made in terms of, getting enhanced policies, particularly around pay and length of leave and day one rights to that leave. I think one of the biggest barriers for smaller employers, where they might not be in a position to offer enhanced policies is the low statutory remuneration and the statutory entitlements. That obviously makes it a huge barrier for them. And then the complexity of the system, which I think we discussed quite a bit as well. And just if it's a challenge for everyone to navigate, if you've got limited resources in terms of like your HR and personnel teams. And we've definitely had experiences where we've had reps sort of saying that it's not that smaller employers don't always, when requests for shared parental leave and stuff are turned down, or how, when it's been a difficult conversation, it's not always because the employer doesn't want to do it. It's because there's a real kind of complexity to the system and people just genuinely not knowing who's entitled and how to administer that. And I think particularly having an individual right for each parent would also help a little bit with that, because with shared parental leave in particular, you've obviously got to potentially liaise with another employer because it's the maternal transfer model, and that adds another layer of complexity as well to navigate, which I imagine would be very challenging for smaller employers who don't have the big resource teams in that to administer that.
Got you. So I might, Nikki, while you're on, as it were, just follow up with a question that I know Claire answered last time, but you didn't get the chance to, which was, should the government consider introducing a streamlined process or an online platform? Have you had any thoughts about how the actual administrative burden might be eased?
Yeah, I definitely think streamlining the process. I think fundamentally, the shared parental leave system in particular, as I've said, I think an individual right for each parent would be really helpful in just making clear who's entitled to what and how that works. And I think some of the other eligibility criteria, we know there's like minimum earnings thresholds. There's obviously whether it's day one right. Well, it's not, but if it were. So I think some of those eligibility criteria, again, would just make this system less complex, and that would help naturally to streamline the process. So I think it is about fundamental reform as well as supporting with, clear materials, which I know a lot of organisations, including, the CIPD and stuff, do do, but the system itself, I think, as we've all sort of discussed, is incredibly complicated, even for trade union reps who are supporting people in the workplace, and those of us sat around here today sort of talking about the system. So I think that needs to be addressed fundamentally.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rachel.
Yeah. Thank you. Apologies for being late. Do you agree that some form of shared parental leave should be maintained within the statutory system, because it's obviously the only element that offers significant flexibility to parents? Nikki, I'm happy if you want to answer that one first.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I think, we definitely agree there does need to be some form of shared parental leave beyond that, in addition to maternity and paternity or adoption leave. We know we need a system that offers families real choice and flexibility, and that's really essential to driving gender equality and the longer term benefits for families of sharing those responsibilities more equitably. But it's also for the economy more broadly. I know when I was preparing for this, I was reading a report from the Women's Budget Group that they did jointly with the Centre for Local Economic Strategies last year, and they found that the cost of the barriers to paid work encountered by women, which aren't all related to just parental rights, there's broader care and responsibilities, there's flexible working, there's lots of other things to it, but that broad cost of the barriers to paid work for women was worth £95 billion a year to the economy. So, there's a huge economic argument here for ensuring that the parental leave system, along with other things, really works to kind of support women to participate in the economy and in the workplace. I think the government's own evaluation of shared parental leave has found that the families who were able to take it did strongly agree that the system had given them flexibility in how they share parenting. But the problem, as we've discussed and as that evaluation found, is that it's such a small proportion of families that are able to use the system as it currently is. I think it's about 1% for mothers and 5% for fathers from the government's own evaluation. So I think without reform, it's unlikely that it can drive the changes that we want to see. And we know from countries where they do have schemes that are simpler, better enumerated, and have that individual right to leave and pay for both parents, it does suggest that take-up and outcomes have been more positive. So it's absolutely fundamental that we have a system that does support families going forward.
Thanks. Claire, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we would recommend certainly retaining, but as Nikki said, reforming both shared parental leave and paternity leave to provide greater choice for working parents in different circumstances. And the Department for Business and Trade's 2023 evaluation report showed, for, as we've discussed, the relatively small number of parents that took up SPL, there were real benefits, which included greater choice and flexibility on how they share their parenting responsibilities in the first year, fathers' ability to spend time with and bond with their child, mothers being enabled to go back to work earlier and to their previous role, which I think is helpful. Time at home had also led to personal growth and development. So I think that there are benefits from shared parental leave, but we do need revisions to the system. As Nikki said, we would also like to see that protected entitlement to paternity or parental leave at 6 weeks at or near the full rate of pay as well, because I think that combination would be really helpful and give more choice and flexibility to working parents, and hopefully would encourage more fathers and partners to take up parental leave, which is what we want to support greater labour market participation, greater gender equality overall.
Thanks, Claire. And while you're sort of on the screen, we've heard quite a bit that the requirement of 8 weeks' notice to change blocks of shared parental leave is onerous on parents and incompatible with the reality of parenting. Why do you think employers do need 8 weeks' notice?
Should I go first on that?
Yeah.
Sorry, we didn't. You cut out a little bit at the beginning. So for us, I think this is something that we would need to consult with our members on to gain a better understanding of needs around notice periods, and ensure that employers are able to get cover for parents taking the leave. However, 8 weeks seems like a substantial period of time, and there might well be opportunities to reduce this to better support parents' needs. I think it's also worth flagging for larger organisations research that was done by the Equal Parenting Project of good practice employers, which showed that actually when significant periods of shared parental leave were agreed, internal secondments were set up, particularly for senior roles, and this was a real opportunity for kind of development and inclusion within the business. But it would be, in general, something that we would need to consult with our members more broadly on to try to really understand the needs around that notice period.
Thanks, Claire. Jonny, do you think a reduced notice period would be proportionate and feasible in these arrangements?
So I completely understand why the firms are saying 8 weeks, because it allows them to plan. But then, as you say, I think the question implies there's a balance between that and parenting. So look, what we do is that we have if somebody's moving, we have a 4-week internal notice period. And to me, I can see, as I say, the kind of 8 weeks being very advantageous for the organisation, because you do need to plan, and if somebody's going off, you don't want that to affect the organisation. To me, just as an opinion, 8 weeks seems a bit too far, a bit too long, and we can generally make it work from 4 weeks, albeit I would call out that we certainly have some exceptions.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Alex.
Thank you. Jonny, I'll stick with you for now, if that's all right. I have some specific questions on Aviva's policy. How close to equal is the take-up of mothers and fathers in Aviva's equal parenting leave policy? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so and just to remind you, obviously, from the session last week, that everybody's entitled to the full 26 weeks. We have, and that's been the case for 7 years, so we've got some good data. It does, as everything does, fluctuate, but 100% of women take 6 months. In actual fact, the average women take will be 12 months, so the 6 months paid and then the 6 months in statutory. 80% of men take over 5 months. So whichever way you kind of look at the stats, generally men take between 21 and the best we've ever got it up to is 25 weeks in terms of average. So we have done a number of focus groups to understand that. Why are you coming back early if you've got the time off? And to be candid, it is all the challenges that women have had over decades in terms of, they were worried around, will the company be okay without me? But actually, genuinely, it's a bit about what about their job and all those fears that actually we know from many, many years, as I say, that mothers has gone through. So we desperately try and push you to get to 20. Our goal is that we get that. We're obviously happy we're getting to 21 is the average for this year. Previously, it's been higher. It's a fairly good figure. But actually, 26 weeks would be good. It has a huge impact when those fathers come back into the organisation.
I'd love to pick your brains on that, but I need to stick on the logistics of the policy. So what has driven take up of your equal parental leave policy, particularly by dads?
So we have made a concerted effort since it was first introduced to start using role models about what they then do in that time off. So we do lots of storytelling. Like most organisations, people tend to have a kind of listen slightly more to senior people, but of course, unfortunately, there are less senior people because it takes a bit longer sometimes to get more senior to be the role models. But we've had a number of examples where quite high-profile individuals have taken the full time off and then come back into the organisation. We had a huge event recently for International Women's Day where we had a male director be able to talk about the time they'd off, the impact it had. But what was also crucial at that is they then talked about what happens going forward. So they were role modelling around saying, and I will be dropping at the nursery 2 days a week. My wife works and this is what she does. And that's part of our goal, that we then get fathers far more involved in the early years, which will then obviously have an impact in terms of how much they have for later years as well.
Thank you. Have you been able to track the impact of the policy on parents' career progression and earnings? And has there been any impact on your gender pay gap?
So our gender pay gap has come down every single year since we published it. I would candidly tell you it is still too high, but it has come down every single year. But I think it's so many different factors to go into it. So to kind of, if you look at the same time we introduced the equal parental leave, we also introduced a target in line with the Treasury's Women in Finance that we would to 40% of our leaders, and that's the most senior 5%. So it's big jobs, I would say, that 40% of our leaders would be women, and we achieved that early at 41%. And it's just, if you put together the equal parental leave, you add together that you're having a real focus on women. You then, fortunately, are one of very few companies who's a women chief executive who's doing really well, and the organisation is doing well. All those factors, I think, contribute towards our a reduction in our pay gap, but equally our increase in leadership representation. But the kind of metric that I look towards, which again, I can't dictate it solely down to this, but it's about a whole factor of things, is that our employee engagement, which I think I mentioned last Tuesday, is outstanding. It's over 90%, it's 91%. And we know that that is because individuals in the organisation feel they can be themselves at work. Being yourself at work in this case might well be the fact that you're a father that doesn't have the concern about you might be coming in slightly later, going slightly early, because there are other things that you want to go and do. But look, I can't categorically say that, but we believe it is one of the factors that affects such high engagement.
Thank you. And I just have one more question. I'm going to ask this to you, and then I'm going to come and ask it to Claire as well. So you've said that your equal parental leave is part of a wider cultural transformation in the organisation. So why do you think that wider organisational culture is important in this context?
Culture for us is absolutely everything. We've got to work in an organisation where values are really important. Bear in mind that we're the largest UK insurer, so we just need to make sure that people do the right thing, by customers, by colleagues, and having that more caring culture. It's one of our 4 values. Just stands out massively. One of the things that we found when I set up the employee resource groups 5 years ago is we introduced a new one called carers, but different to other companies, we included parents, and it grew to be one of the largest. The community that I've created there over things that many people just see part of everyday life, but is a bit about sharing how you can balance parenting and working and thrive at both. There's a whole community that's come within that, and we know that by higher retention, lower turnover is one of a number of good outputs that come because of the culture that we're creating rather than created.
Thank you. Claire, can I ask you the same question about organisational culture and how important that is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's really important to think holistically about the support that organisations have in place for working parents, because parental leave is incredibly important. But if the culture is one where people don't feel that they're able to take up the leave, or that it might negatively impact upon their career progression, then we're just not going to be able to move forward on this. So I think I mentioned in the previous session, but I think there are a whole range of things that employers can do. And that includes having transparent policies around their support for working parents. That might be parental leave, it might be flexible working, it might be support groups, as Jonny's just alluded to. Comprehensive flexible working policies as well. So not just flexibility in location, but also thinking about patterns and hours as well, and how that can be enabled. Role models, and Jonny's spoken a lot about that already at different levels throughout the organisation, I think can be really encouraging in terms of supporting people to talk about their caring responsibilities. Having that supportive conversation with your line manager also is pivotal. So I think some training for line managers around this can be really helpful, so that first of all they know what policies are on offer within the organisation, but they also take a one-to-one approach with their team members to ensure that they're getting the support and flexibility that they need. And then I think there's also a really helpful piece around return to work support as well, to make sure that people kind of fully integrated back after parental leave through things like flexible working, through support groups, through tailored support sessions and training. We are a judge for the Best Employers for Dads Awards with Elliot Ray and the Equal Parenting Project, and we regularly hear from award winners around great examples of the wider benefits of taking a holistic approach to supporting dads and working parents in general. We've got some data from one of our surveys from 2022, which we looked at what support employers have in place. And around a third have or offer access to remote or hybrid working. 29% of employers support parents through providing flexibility in start and finish times to help with school drop-offs and pickups. 28% proactively promote flexible working options such as job shares, term time working, part-time working. And then we also have around a quarter that have support around health and wellbeing through things like mentoring or counselling. But it's worth just noting that around a quarter said that their organisation doesn't have anything in place to support employees with caring responsibilities. There's still a gap in provision for some organisations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to some excluded groups, because I think we've heard about what works well, particularly from Jonny and from yourself, Claire. So Nikki, a third of self-employed tradesmen did not take a single day of leave after the birth of their child, not a single day of leave. Which groups of parents that are excluded from the parental leave system or poorly provided for should be prioritised in the government's review later this year? And do you think that given the substantial contribution of self-employed dads to our economy, should they be an immediate priority, do you think?
I mean, absolutely. We know that worker status does play a huge role in what rights people can and can't access, and it is particularly challenging for self-employed dads and also workers who might be on insecure contracts or agency workers, because again they tend to then not meet the eligibility criteria for statutory entitlements. So we absolutely would want to see those groups prioritised, but I think, you know, single parents, we know that there's issues there. We should also be looking, I think I mentioned in my previous session, about self-employed mothers and how maternity allowance interacts with universal credit, because they can be up to £6,000 a year worse off than a mother on maternity leave claiming statutory maternity pay and universal credit. I know the review, we would like the review to kind of look at all of these groups, because I think absolutely self-employed dads are a really important group, but also we don't want to have to come back to kind of do a fix later on because a group's being excluded. I think it's really important to look at this holistically and how it supports workers, but particularly I think we know that worker status and the eligibility criteria is a particular barrier for a number of parents, particularly around consistent earnings and length of service in work. So we would like to see some focus on that. And yeah, and again, you know, regardless of employment status, income levels and family type, like everyone does need access to some form of, you know, well remunerated period of leave to be able to spend time with their families.
Thank you. And Jonny, I think even if this is something that is offered, how do we ensure that society views this as a positive thing? And I think it would be great to hear from you about some of perhaps maybe the reluctance that there was initially for dads taking up a big share of leave and being involved.
Look, it comes out in a whole host of different ways. I can't give you evidence, but we're fairly sure that some line managers, for example, have been less or a bit, you know, less welcoming about somebody taking 6 months off, and, you know, comments like, "Will you be taking the full 6 months off?" We don't. I don't have an example of that, but we're fearful that some people might be encouraged to be coming back early, you know, particularly with those that would have maybe only had 2 weeks and saying, well, you're getting 26. But, you know, so I think one thing, it's all very well having a policy, but it needs to have a culture that ensures that's enacted. I think we're nearly pretty much there in that, but I couldn't conclusively say. I do think this business of role models makes a huge difference if people look and see, and that encourages others to try and behave in that sort of way. So I think that's something that just massively stands out in regard to that. And then it's the follow up beyond that. So look, it happens a few years later, but it's about making sure that people can see that it's not just then you come back to work and then it's going back into the kind of grindstone. So, you know, we've got parental coaching, which about helps people in that balance between work and home, and to make sure they get that right. And then just small things every so often. So first day at school, you tend to take half a day off so that you can go to first day at school and really enjoy that and thrive in that. Well, that's 4 years down the line, but actually it's it's a big thing in the family, and it just keeps re-emphasizing the importance of that culture that they have. So I think there's just a number of things. There's not any big main thing. I think there's a whole lot of smaller things that can make a difference.
Thank you. Claire, should the government consider bringing kinship carers into the statutory parental leave system? We know that 8 in 10 kinship carers reduce their hours or quit altogether. So I was just wondering if the CIPD has any policies or any suggestions when it comes to kinship carers, Claire?
Yeah, thank you. I think there are around 164,000 children at the moment growing up in kinship care in England and Wales. So it's certainly an area that needs further exploration and consultation with employers, but also kinship carers themselves to understand what their needs are and what could be supported. I suppose our perspective is, with employers facing so many demands currently, this might be something that could be considered over the longer term and as a kind of phased approach in terms of what support might be needed. As I think it's certainly an area that needs to be, that we need to start to think about and really consider what the needs are.
Thank you. Jonny, does Aviva provide anything for kinship carers, or is this an area that perhaps might be explored at a later date?
It's not. So I mean, I have to say that when I kind of saw that might come up, had a good look to see if there was anything that had any discussions, like in our social boards, and it's just not something that's come across our radar, and I didn't realise it was quite so big in terms of Claire's figures just there, but no.
Okay, thank you. And Nikki, is there anything in terms of the TUC's perspective when it comes to kinship care and kinship carers' access to rights at work at all?
So I think, again, we don't have specific research on kinship carers through our members, so I wouldn't want to speak, as Claire said, on everything that might work best for them. However, we did see a landmark agreement reached between Tesco's and Usdaw in 2023. So Usdaw were able to negotiate a policy with Tesco that gave kinship carers who have a special guardianship order to care for relatives' children equal rights with colleagues who adopt. So so giving birth 26 weeks leave on full pay. So it's I think, again, quite a landmark agreement, but again, I think just speaks to that point of it's a group of people who are excluded, and they absolutely they need access in the same way that any other parent or someone with caring responsibilities would.
Thank you very much. Catherine, did you have any follow-up questions on this? No.
Okay, sure.
No. Nikki, I just wanted to delve down a bit more. I mean, the point that I gave around self-employed tradesmen not taking a third of them not taking a single day off after the birth of their child. How do we ensure that shared parental leave doesn't just stay as something that, I don't know, London dads take? We've heard about the issue of actually more shared parental leave being taken in London than anywhere else in the entire country put together. How do we ensure that this is something that people know about and can have access to, regardless of their job or type of employment or place that they work? How can we do that?
So I think in terms of, as we've discussed at length, for those who are currently entitled to some sort of shared parental leave, whether, the statutory minimum, the biggest barrier is pay and the rate of pay, and many families cannot afford to use that leave. For those that are excluded because they don't meet the eligibility criteria, which might be, they might be in employment or have the right worker status, but their earnings thresholds don't meet those requirements, and there's lots of other intricacies. I think that eligibility criteria needs to be scrapped, simplified, much less onerous. For self-employed dads and workers that don't have the employee status, I think we need to look at the worker status and access to statutory rights, regardless of what your worker status is, whether you're self-employed, an agency worker, or a direct employee. Access to statutory entitlements would be a big first step in order to enable anyone who needs it to take advantage of these rights. And they are a significantly excluded group, and there can also be lots of intricacies in terms of contracts. We have members who are working in things like the entertainment industry, where their employment status again is complex, because they might be contracted as a worker for a short period of time to work on a project, and then they're not, and if that crosses over with when they might need to take some leave and that sort of thing, it can be a real barrier. So worker status and eligibility criteria to give everyone a level playing field and access. But then beyond that, I think we would still need to be looking at the rates of remuneration for statutory entitlements. And, you know, again, as we've discussed, I think particularly around paternity leave as well, the length of it, 2 weeks, even broken up over a year, is probably, you know, it's not going to drive the culture shift that we want to see. Like, we do need to see extensions to that entitlement as well.
Thank you. I'm just going to move on to the timescales and the review for reform from the government. Claire, to what should be the key objectives for the government's proposed full review of SPL system, and what should be the priority areas for that reform, do you think, Claire?
So we think that the review should incorporate obviously evidence from this committee and other sources, including international comparisons, because I think there's a lot of international evidence that many companies have submitted that we could learn a lot from. But it is important to take a holistic view of any change that is needed to support greater gender equality and in turn labour market participation. So we think the review should take a look at all of the different types of parental leave that are currently offered in the UK and consider what reforms would help to boost uptake and how the different types of parental leave interact with one another. You know, some of the themes that we've been talking about here is really looking at an enhanced statutory provision for paternity leave, but also shared parental leave, and that is something that definitely should be considered. We'd also very much support the doing something in terms of the gap in provision for self-employed fathers as well. We have a maternity allowance, but we don't have any type of equivalent paternity allowance. But I suppose our overall view is that given the many provisions that are coming through in the Employment Rights Bill, and there are also amendments, and then we have the Equalities Bill coming through as well, we think it would make sense to potentially take a phased approach to implementing some of the changes from this review so that they are implemented after the majority of these changes, because businesses have a lot to kind of focus on and get their heads around at the moment. Some of our recent survey findings showed that 4 in 5 organisations expect the planned measures in the Employment Rights Bill to increase their recruitment costs, and there's also fears around job losses and reduced hiring. So I think further changes need to be thought through and really carefully timed as well. We would encourage the government to consult thoroughly with employers and representative bodies to ensure that the recommendations are practical, that they're workable and are likely to bring about real change in this important area.
Thank you, Claire. Following on from Claire's question there, Jonny, we'd heard about perhaps looking at some of the international examples, and there's quite a wide range of different international examples there. Given the range, the potentially high costs of reforms in this area, and the impacts on business, as we'd heard from Claire, about possible phasing of this, what would be a sensible timescale for implementation of reforms? And that question's to Jonny.
So if I can think back to when we looked at this, we actually went very quickly. We came up with the idea, we investigated it, speaking to other organisations, of which there were very few in the UK, and we went externally. I think we were able to implement it within a year and a half. In the UK, we took a lot longer to go to our 2 other big markets, which are the UK and Canada. And I would just emphasise Claire's point around the international learnings are significant, and that's where we were able to get for fairly good ideas in terms of what you should have as the provision.
Thank you very much. And then Nikki, last question from me, and I'll open it up and see if anybody else has any other questions. But by which metrics should the government measure the success of its reforms, do you think?
I mean, I think some of the questions around metrics could actually be included in the review to get a sense of what would be helpful in terms of monitoring in businesses and from trade unions. But I think particularly we would want to, you would obviously want to see tracking of improvements in take-up, ensuring that we are gathering that data and seeing improvements for families who are typically excluded, so those on lower incomes, self-employed workers, workers with insecure employment status, single parent families. We'd also like to consider monitoring the broader and longer term impacts. So I think, as has been alluded to in some of the evidence today, the parental leave element is really important, but it's also about the longer term impacts in businesses and in society. So, what is the uptake of flexible working between mums, dads and co-parents in a workplace? What are recruitment and retention rates and progression in the workplace, particularly for mums and parents who are returning from leave, and that type of thing, so that we can measure those broader impacts and see the longer term benefits as well. And again, then we've got information about the kind of cost benefits and investment into the system.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask committee members, do you have some questions?
Yeah.
Catherine and then Alex. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been really interesting and far-ranging discussion, obviously, and I know, of course, we're all aware that there is no silver bullet that's just going to improve shared parental leave. If it was that simple, I guess we'd have done it. But I am going to put you all on the spot and ask you if there was one thing that could be done tomorrow to improve the situation around shared parental leave. What would that be?
So I think the one thing would have to be to enhance the payment aspect of shared parental leave. And I think, that's the thing that's stopping the take up, really. So that's one thing. But the other thing would be, I think we need to raise awareness more with both employees. So if we can, have information early on for mothers and fathers that there is shared parental leave, but also simplify the process for employers. I think I shared with James, we have recently shared a neonatal leave and pay infographic with our members, which is quite a complicated new legislation that's coming in, but the engagement levels with it have been, wonderful. Loads of people liking it, loads of people sharing it, and I think, a visual like that around shared parental leave would help to promote understanding from employers, but we also need something for employees as well. But I think it's the enhanced payment provision which would make a difference.
Nikki?
Yeah, I would agree. I think enhanced pay is the barrier, is the biggest barrier that we're most commonly told. I do think an individual, looking at how quickly we can move to an individual right for both parents, would also really help, because that will also simplify some of the admin as well. But when we've surveyed and done polling on this, one of the challenges is also, rightly, mothers do not want to give up part of their leave. They don't just need it for caring and bonding with the child, they need it for recovery and for those that choose to breastfeed. So I think that is also tied to pay as well, but I think that would be really important.
Thank you. Jonny, did you want to give your one thing?
The role of the father. Dads are parents too, and one of the reasons we got ours is because dads internally in the organisation said, wait a minute, we want increased leave, we want to be involved, and then the more they're involved, then the longer that lasts in terms of the early years and beyond.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Alex?
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions. How much do you think the pre-existing gender pay gap before couples have children have an impact on take-up of parental leave?
Can I answer that just slightly in terms of, we did a lot of data science in regard to the gender pay gap, and if we could do anything, how we bring it down. We found out we had a relative, a significant gender pay gap even before the average age of somebody going off on leave. Yeah. So I think that because we've looked at so many things about trying to see if we can just get this gender pay gap reduced, and it is so multifaceted, but actually the challenges have already happened before someone goes on leave, which is not great news, but that I think is a reality, certainly here, and I suspect in other companies.
And then do you think that the fact that is a reality so early on, does that then impact whether dads can afford for the family to take that leave, given that they are more likely to be the higher earner at that point?
Yes, so I suspect it does. And a stat that I didn't share, so with that we say women take average 12 months, so they take out longer. We know again through data science, the longer you take off, the slower your progression. So therefore, it's a double whammy in terms of affecting women. So they might go at a slightly more junior level when they come back, and bear in mind that legally you have to come back to the same level, not the same job if you're out for over 6 months. That's the challenge. That's why we introduced parental coaching, to try and help, try and accelerate as much as we can. And sorry, just to add another bit of bad news, but it is a reality, is that part-time colleagues, and if you're looking at metrics, the amount of part-time colleagues that are men is quite an interesting one, because we have got 2,500 part-time colleagues in the UK out of a population of about 17,000. 90% of them are women, and 90%, and most of them that have come back from leave. And if that was reduced, so say that it was 20-30% were men, then that would indicate that they were taking a stronger role in terms of upbringing over the longer term.
Thank you.
Yeah,
one more question, which is for Claire. Claire, is there a country where this has been done best, looking at that cost-benefit analysis that you were talking about earlier on?
I think that, we shared a few different examples which were really interesting. So I think the example in Spain is a good one, and I think you've probably talked about this previously in your committee meeting. Also, Sweden and Iceland as well, where there are individual entitlements. I think that works really well. I came across a really helpful study by Earl in 2023, which is a analysis across loads of different studies, and some of the key lessons from that is about making sure that any wage replacement rate is at least 80%. That would be a critical determinant of parents' take up, particularly fathers. And also the importance of including flexibility in how the leave can be taken, and addressing institutional and cultural barriers that might prevent fathers as well as mothers from using their leave. And then also making sure that there are legal provisions that prohibit retaliation for taking paid leave and protect caregivers of all genders from discrimination. And that's kind of the lessons from an international comparison study. So I think there's some really rich data that we can draw upon there.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. And again, our gratitude in being able to come back. This has been really insightful and really useful. Thank you very much to all three of you. That brings this session to a close. Order. Thank you.
Thank you.